Product Talk with Malti.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to this episode of Product Talk with Malthi. And today I'm super excited to have my guest, Ranjani Mani. Hi, Ranjani. Welcome to this episode.
Good to be here, Malti. We've been planning this for quite some time, so I'm really glad to be here and meet you
Absolutely,
and your
absolutely.
viewers.
Thank you to make this happen. And I was just thinking about, how do I go about introducing you? And you are such a multifaceted person, right? Being a hardcore technologist, I was, looking at your profile. You are somebody who has been soaked in data and technology and artificial intelligence for a very, very long time, for most part of your career, right? And then I'm so inspired to see the at different forums where you represent, and how much you're influencing and inspiring the young women, especially those who want to come into STEM. And beyond that, you are a community evangelist. I know how much you look forward to pay back to the community, and a community evangelist, right? And beyond all, I think I'm definitely in awe with some of the brilliant storytelling pieces, bringing in technology, your personal experiences that you put out there. So really, really enamored with a lot of different things that you do, and I hope that you're able to scratch the surface of that something today in our conversation.
Yeah, I know you're being very kind, Malti, right? You tend to do a lot of things as well. Definitely look forward to chatting
Yeah,
more
sure.
about
Thanks.
this.
So let's get started, Ranjani. In the last 20-25 years, we have seen an explosion in the whole technology landscape, right? So, and you have kind of
Mhm.
seen that through different waves of how this has emerged, right? So, a little bit reflection in terms of, especially when this whole data thing became so big, especially in the early part of the 2010 decade, right? And then moving on to the evolution of AI into the mainstream. How do you think that has
Mm.
influenced your journey?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, honestly, Malti, I wish I can say that it was all very planned out and all of that. No, absolutely not. I wanted to go into medicine, right? And for whatever reasons, my parents preferred me doing engineering rather, and I didn't really think of questioning them at that point in time. So I think for me, my journey has been very organic. It wasn't as planned, at least the first 5, 10 years, right? So I started after engineering. I started in Oracle. It was in a tech role. I think I love the tech part of it, the futuristic part of tech. I've always been passionate about tech, right? And it's very interesting because my parents are both like English literature graduates. For some reason, I've just been so fascinated with tech, and they never really understood, but very supportive throughout, right? And in my first job, I remember like I couldn't ask why we are doing. I was coding, but I didn't know why, right? Like so, I was like, okay, why do I do this? And then maybe I thought I should get into a role which allows me to ask these why questions. So because I didn't know any better, I went to do an MBA, right? So I started in product management, and as a product manager, you tend to do a lot of different things. I felt like I was more attracted towards like number crunching and making sense of it. So I'm very attracted towards making sense of data from the perspective of driving business outcomes, not necessarily research per se, right? AI research. And I think that kind of led me into a career in analytics. And like you said, right, I think I was in analytics long before it became so sexy and everyone's looking at it. Like my mom always used to ask Malti, like, what is it that you do at your job, right? Now suddenly she still doesn't understand, but she's thoroughly proud because like, oh, she's in GenAI. Everyone's talking about it, so maybe it's a good thing, right? So, but the good point is, we worked on. I was IC, and then I started leading analytics teams, and this was from design to deployment, right? You get to do a gamut of things from business analytics, from machine learning, from production ready AI systems. And when you start with your fundamentals, you have a good mental model of how things fall. You have a good mental model of where things break, why AI projects fail. And I think now with GenAI coming in, there's such an influx of no code, low code. Any developer can be an AI developer. While all of that is great, I still would really, recommend people to get the fundamentals right, because that's really helped me a lot in terms of how I think, where I look at when things fail, right? So it's been a very organic journey, and over the last couple of years, of course, with GenAI, first it was because we were doing that in my organization. I wanted to learn more, so I started a podcast around this, and then eventually landed up in a role which does this day in day out, right? So um, it's not been planned, but it's definitely turned out to be something which I really enjoy doing. So that's a good thing.
Yeah,
That's
just
always good.
just in between the thick of the things, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's big of
Yeah,
things.
and
Yeah,
as you said,
absolutely.
I mean, suddenly Gen AI has come in like that. Maybe I would say that fresh, breeze, which has suddenly found a lot of interest, and we definitely are in that very early stages of the product adoption curve, right? So when you are in the thick of these things and you're kind of talking to a lot of people, I also see you speak a lot about, with your own journey and probably what you are seeing things around that, right? So Ranjani, in your view, right, how do you see this? What are the very common use cases, especially companies which are very small, early stage startups to the largest legacy, large enterprise organizations, right? Everybody is right now trying to figure out that, is what could be the possible use case, right? So what are some of the most common use cases that you have seen in Gen AI and probably have kind of had a larger acceptance?
Yeah, no, it's a simple question, but yet a multifaceted one, right? Like, first of all, to acknowledge what you said, I keep calling this like the pivotal moment, like the iPhone moment, right? Where it's changing the way we do things, and it's going to impact every single sector. Is there some amount of hype around it? Yes, right? Like much like most technology, but largely there is very tangible impact across sectors, across domains, right? Now, coming back to your question, there are like probably three ways in which you can look at this question, right? A straightforward one is what kind of use cases do you see? I think broadly, I would say it's like a barbell, right? If you can imagine multi, like one set of use cases at one end and then the other extreme. So on one side, you would have heavily regulated industries like BFSI, for example, right? Now they would ideally want to go after low reputation risk use cases, like something which is more internal facing, something which they can try out and say, how does this pan out, right? Before they open it up for larger use cases. So it's largely around, say, chat with your data kind of use cases. On the other end in itself, right, you will have organizations, especially digital natives like web e-commerce, right? They are like really in the cutting edge space. I don't know whether you've heard of this, right? Digital natives is really big in India. After GCR, probably it's biggest in India, right? So, which means they are really exploring cutting edge use cases around multimodality, hybrid LLMs, for so on, right? Now, but that's one facet of it. I think a deeper way of thinking about this is to think about it in terms of what are the broad category of use cases, right? Where does it fall
Mm-hmm.
and what does it solve? Now, any company, any organization, it falls under two or three categories broadly, right? Like one, you're looking at use cases to improve productivity. Now, like summarization, code generation, conversational search, all of those are productivity improvement, right? Now, the second category would be those where you're automating a process, something which is manual, which you're automating, right? Like supply chain automation or fraud detection, for example. The third category broadly is experience, customer experience. How do you improve customer experience, right? And that's been a area where AI has also played a key role, but it's definitely transforming from more of a heuristic model into a natural language model, right? So call center analytics, intelligent call center, and lastly, creative content, right? Building creative content generation. So broadly, if you take any set of use cases, it falls under these categories. Now, what's going to change over time is the maturity of these use cases within each category, right? So that's a broader way of thinking about where do these fall. And finally, a bigger question for leaders to ask is, I don't think it should start at a use case level, which is very bottom up, right? It should start top down. Why are you doing what you're doing, right? In terms of outcomes. So your business outcomes from any Gen AI again falls under maybe three categories, right? One, are you building a new revenue stream altogether? Yeah, through uh, processes we just spoke about. Or two, are you delivering a differentiated customer experience, which can be a huge, differentiator for you against your
Correct.
competitors. And three, are you modernizing your internal processes? So that's the benefits, right? So that's the business outcome. So I think the way I would think about it, if I were a leader, is what are the business outcomes, and then what are my business needs, and then finally, what are the use cases I want to drive, right? That's like overall ecosystem of how
Right. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
panning
that
out.
makes sense, right? I mean, it is both a, as you said, both a top-down approach, and I think that is where we are
Yeah.
in this whole journey, very nascent, trying to explore that can this really translate into a new revenue stream versus could I bring in a very unique value proposition, holistically thinking about
Mhm.
leveraging this technology and versus what could be those smaller low hanging fruits where I could apply it and see this, right? Actually, talking about that
Yeah.
and bringing in such very diverse areas where this could be applied, I was recently reading an article where that a lot of companies are kind of doing POCs, but I think they are still kind of
Mhm.
struggling with, let's say, taking that into production to be able to really clearly identify
Mhm.
that what is the impact it will have in terms of their ROI, right? Are they really able to generate
Mm.
revenues? Because while the goodness of Gen AI is that it can do a lot of things that you just kind of spoke about, we also have to acknowledge that it
Mhm.
comes with a cost, right? Whether it is a cost of the
Yeah.
infra, whether the cost of running it, or just the talent that you
Yeah.
need in order to set this up, right? And that trade-off
Absolutely.
is there is no like a black and white answer there, right? So what
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
your observation, in right now on this space?
Yeah. It's such a good question, right? If someday I write a book, Malti, I'm going to write it titled "Why Do AI Projects Fail?" Right? Because there's just so many reasons why things can fail the way they do. So forget about Gen AI for a moment. Let's take a step back and talk about just generally AI, traditional AI in itself, right? Now there are multiple reasons why AI projects fail. A very few percent, like even if you look at AI in itself, I think only 30-40% of the projects actually succeed, right? And driving business impact. I think that in itself is because of multiple reasons, from probably not having your data stack right, from not being able to ask the right questions, probably not having your AI strategy aligned to your business strategy, not aligning on a consumption plan before you start kicking off, looking at AI as an afterthought. So there are multiple reasons why things fail the way they do, right? But coming back to your question around Gen AI, that's kind of taking it a step further, right? Like, first of all, acknowledging that there are companies which are seeing
Mm-hmm.
very tangible benefits. Um, Also, the reason why there's a lot of investment, right? And recently I was reading, I think A16Z had this report calling out that enterprises, like last year, it was more of a science project, right? Let's try this out. But this year, they've increased their spends. Enterprises have increased their spends from like 2x to
Mm-hmm.
5x in 24, right? And they're deploying more workloads into production. So it's no longer like a shiny new object, right? What's also interesting is the funding for those is not coming from an innovation budget, which means it's more of a research, but it's coming from the IT core IT budgets, for example, right? So which shows that organizations are becoming more serious about it. Now, again, coming back to why things fail, it depends largely on multiple things, starting with the maturity of the organization itself, including the from a data process and people stack, right? For example, I was talking to this founder they were trying to build SEM based Gen AI capability. Now, the challenge is forget about the solution, right? Most of these projects fail because you don't even have the data infrastructure landscape in place. You don't have a data lineage properly. So it starts from there, right? Like that, if that's not in place, for example, you don't have a clear ecosystem of how data flows, for example, you don't have a central strategy, for example. But largely, what we also see is it requires, like you alluded, it requires the right tech talent, especially in Gen AI. And implementing and scaling Gen AI, if they don't have this in-house, for example, or if you don't have this historically, like if you don't have traditional AI and you suddenly jump into Gen AI without the right talent, it's more likely to fail, is what my point is, right? And that again is a gap which will be filled up maybe by professional services, by some startups which come in the space, but definitely within the Gen AI space at least, right? I think again one of the reports called out that you know LLMs are probably one quarter of the cost of building use cases, right? And most of the development cost is the development cost itself accounts for majority of the budget. So it's also the right technical talent. So it's all of this, but the point I do want to reiterate is it's all is not lost, right? It's not like there are no production workloads or organizations are not seeing tangible benefits. Very much seeing tangible benefits, but we need to have all of these fundamentals in place for organizations to realize
Yeah,
those benefits over
completely,
time.
completely. And I think, yeah, you, as you said, I mean, I think one of the things, for example, even in my class, when we have these questions, I think it is very contextual, right? So I think a very in a lighter tone, one of the word that it says is it depends, right? So it depends on a lot of different parameters, right? So no matter how we say it in a light tone manner, but it is kind of very very contextual. I completely
Yeah. Good. Just on that one point, right? Like I was talking to someone, I met a lot of folks, and someone was telling me, right, that it's more bottom up. There's no exec sponsorship. Now, that's not a tech challenge, but it's still a challenge because if you don't have exec sponsorship, you're selling your solutions, right? You're not building in itself. So, again, to your point, it could be
absolutely.
that facet as well. So, it's all of these
Yeah,
different
I
things which
think
have to
every
come together.
organization kind of challenges could be very, very different, right? And actually, that kind of
Mm,
also, I want to kind of navigate towards another point, which is kind of, in especially a lot of times when you are seeing that how can tech or product can be an influencer from a strategy perspective for a organization, let's say, to become AI first or wherever they are going as an enabler. A product manager plays a very pivotal role there, right? Now, we already spoke about a bunch of reasons. It could be lack of awareness with leadership, it could be not having the right kind of data, just not having the right kind of talent, right? So I do think that a product manager has a very important role to kind of tie down these things, because we are the one who are, kind of bridging the gap between customer, business, tech, and some of the other stakeholders. So would you have some thoughts around, where should a product manager start? What would be the guidelines, when you're kind of thinking about initiating on this journey of building an AI product?
yeah. Yeah, you're right. I would probably call them the architects, right? Architects of how do you drive business
Right.
outcomes with GenAI. And again, I'm talking about PMs who actually build in GenAI, right? Like not the outer core, the inner core. The outer core is ones who use AI to augment their work, maybe doing something else. But I'm talking about the inner core, right? Absolutely. And the way I frame it in my head is probably how do they help across the value chain of the customer journey, right? The biggest thing for me as a product manager is are you looking at
Hmm.
problem first and tech second? Especially in
Hmm.
this space like Gen AI. I'm talking to a lot of startups, Malthi, and many a times it's like, hammer in search of a nail, right? I want to use the technology, let's go find a problem. It never really, sustains. It's not scalable. That's one. Two, if and you've probably read this, right? When you have it only as a wrapper without necessarily having a core value, and core value not doesn't come only from the algorithm. It comes from all of the additional augmentation and scaffolding which you have, from like user provisioning to how do you put the workflow together, what are the benefits you drive, right? So I think that's the focus which the PM can bring together. So starting with that, right? Like problem first, tech second. Biggest thing in that value chain is just understand the business goals and the pain points. Like we started off, right? What is it? Am I trying to automate something? Am I trying to improve productivity? Why am I doing this? How does it tie back to the company North Star? I think that's one key area. And definitely like bringing stakeholders together. Most of this are org wide initiatives, and they have multiple stakeholders, each of which probably have contrarian incentives, right? Someone is looking at optimizing costs, someone is optimizing something else. You need to bring them together. It also means you bring together enabling teams like data scientists and data engineers and domain experts, right? So that collaboration definitely second. And the third, which is a general PM function, but more important in this case, is a use case prioritization. Now, GenAI, just on the sheer nature of how it is, it's evolving so rapidly that every day there's a shiny new object. Every single day you'll find something new. Now, how do you stop running after the shiny things, right? Someone was asking me this question. Ranjani, by the time we do this, something else comes up. How do I stay on top of it, right? I think the question is not that I should be on the most latest model. The question is, how do you build an environment and organization which is adaptable to being in a volatile environment? How do you adapt as quickly, right? So the prioritization of use cases, making sure that you're picking use cases which are worth the squeeze, right? Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes you don't need to bring in GenAI, right? So defining that, and especially if you move closer to the tech stack itself, this is again something which PMs can do in collaboration with the tech teams, is choosing your architecture, choosing your models. Many times people ask this question: should I go for open source or closed source? Like, again, it's a it depends question, right? Like, what is your strategy? Why are you doing what you're doing? How are you going to scale? For example, now we have, I generally believe SLMs are going to go big, right? And if not already, so when do you bring in SLMs, right? When you have a very specific problem, you don't want to bring a general purpose AI. So I think getting that, and finally, how do you continue to fine tune, optimize it, and do the change management and integration and deployment, right? Because building is just one thing, but consumption is where things break. So you want to make sure that it's adapted and there's a closed loop. So if you look at just the value chain itself, there are multiple places where it can break, and no one is holding all of that together. The only person who can hold it together is a PM. And maybe you can share your thoughts, Malti. I feel like PM roles, especially in AI, Gen AI, is still evolving. Like, while all of this is needs to be done, it's still a process which is evolving right now, is what I believe. But
Yeah,
hopefully,
yeah. I mean,
that's
see, the
something
fun,
that
as
gets
you
to
said, right? I
soon.
mean, first of all, this whole thing is moving so fast, right? And uh,
Yeah.
I mean, across the organization at all level, people are still kind of trying to understand, and then this whole mapping of what you said, the right use case to the right kind of technology, right? So it's like everybody's bringing in their own thoughts, and it is still very evolving. And the other very important aspect, which I think, and is that the fundamental nature, the way you develop the products, right? For example, your regularly PDLC cycle, you do not think so much about data on day one, right? Versus when you are building an AI
Mm.
first product, that is like the core foundation. Do you have that data? Do you need to procure that data? Is that data even in a good shape that it can be, fed into the, whether you are taking a, off the shelf model or you're building something in house? Those are some very fundamental questions, which is different for a PM to ask than a traditional, software product, right? So I think there is
Yeah.
a lot of learning, and you're right. I mean, I think as they are trying to hold the ropes together for these new initiatives, they are also kind of evolving and learning.
Yeah. No, it reminded me of this product which we had. It was a AI-driven proactive support product which we had built a long time ago, right? And the role for PM over there was so key, because as we were thinking about the roadmap of the product at a functional level, he and I used to sit together to map out what do we need to do at a data level, like bring in the data engineering leader as well to say what do we need. Because if you think about it, right, if you want to build a recommender system at some point in time, if you're not capturing the data in the format which you need, if it's not at the granularity you need, you don't have all of the sources coming in at that level in the data lake, it's going to fail downstream, right? What are the trade-offs you're considering? Because again, you can't have everything dumped in, right? You cost is also important. So that optimization of cost versus what you need in order to build, absolutely a key role, right? And it can get very messy without. And I've had data product managers also, right, who look at this very intentionally, because when companies grow, projects grow, they grow at scale without necessarily thinking about this. You continue to add tech debt, and sometimes you need to have tech debt, which is okay. But then that doesn't get controlled, right? And things break. Everyone tries to do their own version of things, and if you work with data, it's crazy, right? To look at the same thing in
Yeah,
10 different formats. So
you never know, it can become
absolutely
a
crucial
monster
in that
when.
case. Yeah. Yeah, anyone who's done this in SQL will really empathize, right? Sometimes you have a same, like a name of a city which is written in 10 different ways. It's very
Correct, correct, correct.
infuriating. So yeah.
Actually, since you've kind of also spoke about the whole optimizations and getting into the, just folding your sleeves and getting into the details, how do you think is the outcome? Right, a lot of success. I think the KPIs for a product manager is that whatever you are working on, talk about the impact, talk about the outcome, talk about the metrics, right? So how do you think it is very different from a, let's say, a SaaS product or a traditional software, when a product manager is thinking about the outcome for a AI first product? What should be some of the guidelines?
See, I'll talk about like generally whether it's a product manager or anyone who's building a product
Sure.
from even a tech team perspective, right? Most of the time, what happens is you think output, you don't think outcome. Output is the output of a model. You will probably look at AUC or R square. You look at metrics which
Right.
says how good your model is, right? And I remember Malti, we were using language models even for like these was topic models, right? Like LDA models that were long time ago, and we remember putting this free text into clusters and then kind of making sense of it, and everything looked very nice and fancy. And then we went and presented to this leadership team, which included SMEs, and they're like, this doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. It doesn't come together coherently at all, right? Now, they could understand it because they were the SMEs, then they could differentiate between a symptom and a root cause, which it wasn't to us, right? So I think the key is for us to understand the difference that output is not always an outcome, right? An outcome is what drives impact. Numbers, insights don't, actions do. So I think constantly for the product manager or engineering leader who's building AI is to think about, okay, I'm doing this, but what is it translating into in terms of business outcome? So if I'm giving an insight, is that translating into cost efficiency? If I'm giving an insight, is it translating into revenue? So if I'm providing a recommendation, how does that translate into in terms of impact, right? I think that is something you constantly do. And slightly more mature organizations put this as part of the process. So something which we used to do in one of our previous orgs is do A/B tests, right? Like anytime we roll out, we would run A/B tests to compare how the outcomes are with the customer in itself to say that okay, this actually makes sense, right? So it's
Hmm.
very outcome oriented. I think that's definitely one thing to keep in mind. So you're not just saying like if you were to look at a SaaS product, you can also always look at just overall revenue. This isn't as straightforward, right? You'll have to probably look at how customers are adopting it. How where is it breaking? Like for example, if I have to have a recommender system, I'll probably look at am I moving the customer across the customer journey as it was intended, right? Like that's you start from there and then go back and build your
Correct.
model, not the other
Always
way
start
around.
from the end.
So yeah, it's a very
Yeah, no, that
yeah.
is right. And as you said, I mean, I think it also kind of evolves as you continue to build your product and understand the impact on the end user. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
Ranjani, I mean, you are somebody who's very multifaceted and this thing, right? So, as a leader, right, whether it is your team members or part of the ecosystem, how do you kind of guide people to these times when there is, as you said, one new shiny object probably every day, every week, or every month, to kind of navigate through these while it is very exciting, it could also be very overwhelming for people, right? So, what would be your guidance for them?
Yeah, it's a very common question. How do you stay relevant? How do you continue to be up to date in this space, right? I wish there was like one straightforward answer, Malti, but I think it's multiple things. And again, it's things which just work for me. I'm sure there are other things which will work for other folks, right? My biggest thing I've always intentionally worked on is be closer to what you want to learn, right? Like when you work in that space, you tend to learn. 80% of your learning happens on the job, right? So be closer in terms of that. Now, again, not everyone will say I'll work only on GenAI. I know that's not feasible as well, but then think about it in terms of the projects you like for example, I was talking to this reporting analyst, right? Now, if she's interested in Gen AI, I would love for her to reimagine what she's doing. How will that look like differently if I were to use Gen AI, right? So reimagining that with what it is, and then trying to look at what else is happening in that sector, for example, right? I think that's a great way of learning from real things because it's very easy, Malti, in this to get caught up into the hype. Every day there's a paper, every day there's clickbaity articles, right? Like that may feel like you're learning, but it's busy work. It's not productive work. Productive work happens when you go deeper into one thing, and deeper happens in a few ways, right? One, like I said, work on it. Work on it. Work in the context of what you're doing, right? If you're in healthcare, do something in healthcare around that. So that's definitely one. Two, again, in the context of going deeper, it's better to read one paper, understanding the fundamentals versus looking at 10 different just articles
Right.
about what's the latest, right? Because you want to understand the concepts of how it works. I think sometimes it feels like a jigsaw puzzle, Malti, right? Like there are different things which are there, and the key is to just continue going through that, and at some point in time it falls together, right? So I would say just start reading those different things. Sometimes people ask, give me a list of things. I can give you a list of things, but you know what? In like 10 days times, again there's going to be something else which comes in. Start with the fundamentals and go through that is the second thing. And the third thing which I personally like doing is a process. I believe that process drives outcomes, not plans, right? Like you can make all of these elaborate plans, but then process is like to say I lose weight as a plan, but to say I will go run for 30 minutes every morning at 8 o'clock is a process, right? So I believe in processes, which means there is a deep ask lot which I have for myself where I sit and do my learning, sit and do understand where the customer challenges are. I get into a lot of customer calls to understand where there are. And that I think is a difficult way of learning, but it's a good deep way of learning. So I think it's a combination of all of these three which work for me, and definitely would recommend that. And if you're also interested in
Hmm.
space, get your hands dirty. Like there's only so much you can do by sitting back and just trying to read through it, right? Get your hands dirty. Go to meetups, meet people who are there, talk to people who are working in the space. Try to get to level 200, 300 versus level 100, which is where most people are, right? They just want everything in a
Absolutely.
miracle. It doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think, especially anything, as you said, I think the best way of learning is just by doing it. Yeah. Would you,
Yeah,
any, or
absolutely.
top of the mind, any resources or any books or any uh, sources that you want to kind of recommend?
Yeah, no, Microsoft has a huge, like, I think there's a huge resource, which is all free, by the way, right? Starting from GenAI 101 fundamentals to certified courses. So if you're really serious, you can go through all of that. LinkedIn Learning has a bunch of courses which you can go through as well. If you're more interested from like a strategic perspective of it, I think A16Z has this thing called
Mm-hmm.
AI Canon, which is like a list of, just starting from what is software 2.0 to the entire evolution of LLM, why and how did transformers change that, make that pivotal change to the entire journey, right? So each of these alone are like really in-depth content. And of course, I read a lot of books around the topic. I'm reading this. It's a very nice book, by the way. It's on the
Oh,
history
okay.
of intelligence. Yeah, it talks about how the evolution of the brain, understanding the evolution of the brain, would help us interpret the future of AI, right? So it's kind of nice, and sometimes it just feels overwhelming. Malte, I need to call out, right? It's not like I have it all clear. Sometimes it just feels like there's so much. And I sometimes dream about AI, right? Like it sounds a very nerdy thing to say, but it does because there's
Yeah.
just so much of content. So while that's natural, I think over a period of time, when you reflect and look back at 6 months, how far
Yeah.
you've come a long way. So go slow to
Yeah.
go
No,
fast
I
is what
mean,
I'd say.
thank you. You kind of named some really wonderful resources, and I agree with you. I think when you are just soaking in so much, I think there is this thin line, where you are living it versus you are, living it literally all times of the day. So, yeah,
I
yeah,
know,
no,
I know. My daughter keeps teasing me about it,
yeah.
but
So, I think those are some wonderful share outs, Ranjani. And probably I now have the most interesting question, which is probably if you can put it in like a capsule. How do you think AI is going to impact the product management role?
see, I think it comes back to what we were speaking about earlier in terms of
Hmm.
being the key architects, right? Now, I'll tell you again, the PM role in itself, I feel is not just one thing, and you are a better person to talk about it, Malti, right? I feel that PM role where PMs use AI to do what they're doing better. That's one type of role, right? And then there are product owners who also are called PMs in certain organizations, which is another. And there are very few probably who are actually PMs working on an AI related product or an AI core functionality product. So
Hmm.
each of that is very different. And therefore, the impact I believe AI would have on each one of them is different. So in general, I'll take a step back and say, how does AI impact roles in itself, right?
Mhm.
Not just people. And there's always this question around, will it take away my job or will it not? I don't think most of life works in ASCII, right? Does it happen? Does it not? It's mostly in shades of gray. So I believe jobs, if you think about it, has multiple tasks. And now tasks will get automated, right? Not jobs. So then the good question to ask yourself as a PM or any other job is, what are the different tasks which I do and which ones are likely to get automated? Now again, the question is, which ones are likely to get automated? So one framework which I remember reading somewhere, which I really liked is your task or what you're doing
Mhm.
linear or exponential? Which is, example, if I'm a tomato picker today and I continue to do that for 10 years, will I be an exponentially better tomato picker at that point in time, or will I be maybe similar to that? I would be similar, right? Like, I'm not going to get paid 10x because of I was doing this for 10 years, which means that task is
Hmm.
very highly automatable, right? So if all that is happening is like, talking to a system, entering data, highly likely to get out. Those are tasks, right? And each one of us have those tasks. Like even I have things which I would rather get a system to do, right? So I think it's about figuring out how do I work in a collaborative manner. So I think of AI more as a coach versus taking that away. So each person or each PM probably needs to think about that. What will where can it help me? Like for example, a PM, I would probably like to think that research is definitely area where AI could really help, right? Building out those user stories probably it really helps. Figuring out how do I prioritize working with other teams or the stakeholder management, that's where you probably have to come in. So I think it's about figuring out how to work in complement, and that percentage is probably going to differ depending on the type of PM role which you play
Right. No, no,
across
that makes sense. I think
organizations.
in its true sense, if I have to say, it's like in a lot of different ways, AI could be a great coach slash co-pilot, helping you get better at what you do. Exactly, whether it is research
Yeah.
or whether it is you know different things, will be different for different kind of roles.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
that was an amazing set of tips, and I'm sure a lot of folks out there who are aspiring product managers or practitioners will be hugely benefited with this. Thank you so much, Ranjani, for sharing your thoughts on the lot of different questions, and continue to do spread the your knowledge and the goodness of share outs that you keep doing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Malti, and good luck for all that you choose to do. I
Same
had a
here.
lot of fun
Thank
talking to
you.
you.
Product Talk with Malti.